2. Hi, everybody. Welcome to the second hour of the Santita Jackson Show on AM 950 Radio, the voice of progressive Minnesota. I am Santita Jackson. Yes, I'm back, and I'm so glad to be with you today. We're talking about this debate, this game-changing debate. Many people are saying that the president needs to vacate the ticket. But two gentlemen saw problems with his candidacy in 2019, 2020, and they saw problems with his presidency moving forward. And they said, look, you need to step aside, Joe, for the sake of the country, for not the party, for the sake of the country. We need some real options. And they have been in this fight, not just with Joe Biden, but for Bernie Sanders, for Reverend Jesse Jackson's campaigns, plural. They are really icons in the populist space. Indeed, one of these gentlemen asked for peace, appealed for peace in Ukraine, Norman Solomon, and you were suspended from Facebook for 2 weeks. Bless your heart. And you can't make this stuff up. But it lets you know what really is going on in the system and how, Facebook and these social media platforms really do favor the right wing and the oligarchs. And we need to be honest about that. And maybe the gift of this moment is that we're beginning to see what the system really, who it favors and who calls the shots. Because it's not as if, of course, the American voters are concerned, but it's the donors. It's the donors who Biden had to go meet with. The big money. They're the ones who are going to tell him whether he can stay in the race or not. How is that? Don't talk to me about saving democracy when this is how it really works. Are you for real? No. We got to talk about this today. Bryce Green, of course, he has been a leader in this movement for Palestinian justice. I met him as a writer at Fairness and Accuracy in Reporting. He's a PhD candidate at Indiana University. They have banned him from campus because of his activities supporting Palestinian people and Israeli security. It's both.
Actually, this past week, Santita, the university reversed their decision, and I am now allowed back on campus.
Because they had banned you for 5 years, right?
They had banned me for 5 years, but
come on, everybody, let's give it up. Give it up. Come on.
Yeah, I went in for a hearing, and it turns out they didn't even have a file on me.
Well, no, they do have a file, but that's another.
Well, not a student conduct file on the official channel, at least.
I'm just letting you know that's how that works. Dwight McKee, of course, senior advisor to Cornell West, and the dean of the Ma'afa Redemption Project, brilliant social organizer, one of the founders of Operation Push more than 50 years ago, and. We're brilliant social scientists. So glad to have you. And Dr. Alia Amar. Well, you're not my classmate, but certainly we went to the same high school. I was many years ahead of you. And she's brilliant. Is it neuropsychologist?
Yes.
Absolutely. And indeed, she's of world renown. And she's one of the people who I had to ask her what is going on, because we understand that cerebral aneurysms have been in the president's history. He's had difficulties, and just so many people were just so worried when we saw this debate the other night. But these two icons, Jeff Cohen, Roots Action, and Norman Solomon, Roots Action, of course, they have given us Fairness and Accuracy in Reporting. And Institute for Public Accuracy. There is just any time I want to be on point on a story, all I need to do is look to Jeff Cohen and to Norman Solomon. And I am so honored that you are with us today.
It's mutual.
Well, thank you. I'm honored. And before I ask Dr. Amar about she's not going to diagnose, but there's just some things that in her space she saw. You have been calling for Joe Biden to remove himself, to absent himself from the race for quite some time. I mean, just think about it. 4 years ago, we were asking to do that too. because he was so unpopular. He had Kamala. And somehow or another, I don't know how this happens. He ended up at the top of the ticket and ended up president. You need to explain that to me. But there was something, you have had a campaign. What is it? What is the name of the campaign? Step aside, Joe. Don't
Step
go,
aside.
Joe. Stop it. And I need you to explain to me what the campaign was about and why it is that you called for him to vacate this space that he occupies, because you were viewed as heretics when you did it, and now you're prophets. Jeff
Well,
Cohen, Norman Solomon, I don't know who wants to begin. You got it.
shall I begin, Norman?
Yeah.
Yeah, we announced the campaign about 2 years ago. We saw a poll number, a bunch of poll numbers, but the one that shocked us in the New York Times, July of 2022, 94% of young Democrats said they wanted a different nominee than Joe Biden. So we launched the campaign actually the day after the midterm elections of November 2022, and it was called don'trunjoe.org. And people remember that the Democrats did better than expected in the congressional elections of 2022. And what people didn't understand, and the corporate media was generally wrong on this, they thought this was a vote of confidence in Joe Biden. It was actually a vote of confidence in Democrats versus Republicans. That if there was generic D versus R, because of the extremism of the Republican Party, the gun control denialism, the abortion rights denialism, the climate change denialism, even the election denialism, a generic Democrat is going to beat a generic Republican. So we launched this a day after we saw this amazing quote in the New York Times. Mr. Biden's numbers. This is when many people were saying, see, this proves we should stick with Biden. Here's what someone honestly said to the New York Times. Mr. Biden's numbers were, quote, a huge drag on Democratic candidates who won in spite of the president, not thanks to him, the lawmaker said on the condition of anonymity to avoid antagonizing the White House. So, at Roots Action, we don't care whether we antagonize the White House. We're with social justice. We're about peace. And we've understood that if there was an open primary process, that the base of the Democratic Party, which is a social justice base, could make demands on whoever the candidates were. And for there to be an open primary process, we needed Joe Biden to withdraw. So now we're at the convention stage. And we need him to withdraw. We need an open convention so that the social justice base can have some influence. Virtually any Democratic candidate would be stronger than Joe Biden after we witnessed this debate. And if with neo-fascism knocking on the door in November, renewed and reinvigorated racism knocking on the door in November, there's no time to play around. Joe Biden has to withdraw.
What anti-Semitism?
Yes, of course. Well,
yeah. I have to put that out there.
Yeah,
and Islamophobia.
Because
of course, both.
Well, all of it. They're all Semites. So
Yes.
I get it. But it's fueling all of the anti-human issues. and here, as we have made this progress, these people are yanking us back.
Yeah.
But but when you have this closed primary, which is what we had, and they did the same thing to Bernie in 2020. It doesn't do anything but damage the party, and it makes people angry. People stay home, or now you have a lot of black Trumpers, and on and on and on, and you have a lot of white Trumpers who are not necessarily racist.
Yeah.
They're just sick of the system, and they think he's going to change it. Norman Solomon.
There's tremendous fear at the top of the Democratic Party that democracy might prevail, that the democratic process, lowercase d, could really unseat their power. They now are operating with a crown glued to their heads. and they believe that it's their natural order to, and this isn't that different than in past centuries even, that it's a natural order that the rich should rule. But of course, the rhetoric is just the opposite. And when we launched the Don't Run Joe campaign, we were, in retrospect, what you could call premature anti-Bidenists, because running with the herd, the mass media, and the Democratic Party, not just hierarchy, but almost all in the Democratic National Committee, look to the president of their party as a king. And we've seen that phenomenon time and again. And even now, we have so many people, and with due respect, California Governor Gavin Newsom, chair of the DNC, Jamie Harrison, on Tuesday night, Thursday night, and onward, they've been spinning like mad to tell people, you didn't see what you saw. You didn't hear what you heard. We've got a strong candidate out there. But people who are voters, to a large extent, they don't accept the idea that they should be told and then they should believe what they didn't see and what they didn't hear. And that's really, I think, as we speak, the challenge of the Democratic Party hierarchy, because the gap between what people clearly understand from the Thursday night debate and what the hierarchy, the corporate war hierarchy of the party want them to believe, is just too big a gap to paper over.
What would a brokered convention look like? First of all, explain what a brokered convention is. And how would that work? You had Robert Kennedy, whatever you feel about him. He has a lot of enthusiasm, and he was in the field, the Democratic field and fold. He said, I can't move here. I got to get out. Cornel West said, I'm not going to even try this. I mean, these are people who bring energy. But they're not even part of this discussion. How are you going to have, what is a brokered convention, and how can you have a brokered convention with people who are pledged to very unpopular candidates? Who are they going to vote for?
I'd really briefly say that at this stage we are in, through the tunnel of the algorithm, unfortunately, I believe that in terms of the politics, the psychology, and the structure of the Democratic Party nominating someone for president, that unless for some reason, in some way, Joe Biden can be induced to withdraw from this race, either before or after the convention, and afterward it would go to the Democratic National Committee, it's very unlikely that he could be prevented from heading the ticket that people are going to vote on this fall. So I think as a practical matter, what's crucial is that we bring all the grassroots pressure to bear. Like we know, like all the great changes in this country have always come from the grassroots. They never come from on high. And this is a crucial historic case in point where we need to demand, and Rich Action has begun a campaign as of Friday, where constituents around the country are demanding of any Democrat who represents them in the House or Senate that we insist that they speak truth, not just to power, but about power. This is someone who will lead us to another Trump victory if we don't get him, Joe Biden, off the ticket.
But what do you see? He seems like he's not moving.
Well, this is where political analysis and psychoanalysis really begin to converge. And it was really disturbing. And Santita, you began by referring to big donors, which is crucial here. And just hours after the debacle of the debate Thursday night, Jill Biden spoke to a bunch of donors in Manhattan. And she said almost word for word what Biden said in North Carolina. President Biden said it was about when somebody knocks you down, you get up. That's what Joe Biden's about. And the narcissism and the solipsism involved with, I converge to words, solipsism and system. This is how we have somebody at the top of the party and the executive branch of the United States who still believes it's about him. And we have to disabuse him and the party hierarchy that, no, it's not about him. I mean, frankly, I'm sick and tired of the analysis in media and politics. Yes, we should be compassionate for everybody and about his psyche and his history and his life and so forth. His life is no more or less important than a checker you will meet at the grocery store. And we
Mhm.
have to get it straight about what this is about, what is at stake for the people, this country, and the world.
But
I want,
what she left out was, if you get up, you got to get up before the fight is over.
Yeah,
You can't get up the next day
Mhm.
really.
and say I'm still in the fight. You know, they give you 10 counts to get up. But if you get up on the count of 20, the fight is over.
Mhm.
And so it may not matter if he gets up if the fight is over.
Mhm. Well, I mean, what are you hearing? What are you hearing from people, Dwight? I mean, because we're all in different spaces and we're hearing different conversations, but I think that they are amazingly similar. You know, white, black, brown, yellow, red, rich, poor, middle class. I think everybody felt that we were watching a train wreck on Thursday night. And
Well, I think it's a little more complicated than him getting out of the fight, out of the race. I think that there is a whole deficiency in the thinking of the party itself, and that they have the wrong policies at the wrong time. They're locked into a constituency which is very narrow, which is a money constituency,
Mhm.
which is a political constituency that is operating their own interest, that's not looking out for the good of the country. And so I think that there has to be a complete restructuring of the mindset and the apparatus of the Democratic Party for it to be viable.
Mhm.
Because I think even if he's not the candidate, given their policies, given their mindset, they're going to lose anyway. It don't matter who's at the top of the ticket.
Bryce
Whether it's,
Green. Oh, I'm sorry. I'm sorry, Dwight. I didn't mean to interrupt.
whether it's Kamala, whether it's Newsom, I don't think it matters at this point.
Well, I mean, Bryce Green, you're of another generation, certainly, than I. He's not yet 30. Bryce, what are you hearing?
Well, I can tell you that for the last 4 years, no one I have met has been enthusiastic about Joe Biden. No one under the age of 40 or even 50 has said that, yes, I believe that Joe Biden is the man to meet this current moment. And it can be for a number of reasons. Some people have simply looked at his record of being a segregationist, pushing the super predators line, helping us get into the student debt crisis that we're in, and of course, supporting and spearheading all the worst wars of the 21st century. Some people saw that record and said that, well, we don't want more of that. Some people simply saw the fact that the energy of the newer generations was elsewhere. It doesn't take a political pollster of high pedigree to figure out that people want someone who represents them. And Joe Biden is of a different generation. And that's been pretty clear. It was clear during the primary of 2020 that people didn't want Joe Biden because they thought he was exciting. They believed this media line that he was simply the most quote unquote electable. But of course, they failed to understand that that's just a category that the media uses when they pick someone that they want to get behind. It has no actual meaning. Uh, but people felt that Joe Biden was not the man for the moment, and people were correct. And it was pretty surprising. I might be hallucinating this, but if I recall correctly, Joe Biden's people, at least upon getting the nomination, they pledged that he would be a one-term president. Does anyone else remember that? Am I crazy?
You know,
You're
Yeah.
not crazy. You're not crazy.
you're right.
Thank you. Because I mean that's what I remembered. I mean, but of course his presidency has been one broken promise after the next, and he led us from bad to worse. And so it's not surprising that he would then go back on his word on this. But I mean, the entire generation, my entire generation, is losing faith. If they haven't lost faith already, and this entire not just the Democratic Party, but the American system writ large. It's not just the fact that these Democrats are able to, usurp democracy and spit in the face of the younger generation time and time again. It's that there is no alternative. That's the problem.
Yeah.
They feel that correctly that the system isn't designed to accommodate new and progressive ideas. It's designed to codify and stagnate and ossify. I mean, we watched as Dianne Feinstein withered away on live TV before our very eyes, and no one said anything about it. We
No,
watched.
wait. Hold on, Bryce. They told you that you didn't see what you were looking at.
Oh, right. Oh, I
I'm
forgot.
sorry. Wait a minute.
The
Which
party
what?
said my eyes are unreliable.
They're lying to you.
Yeah, you're right. You're right. So people thought we saw Dianne Feinstein, but what we really saw was a very strong Democratic hero taking responsibility for taking us out of power. Whatever the hell they said to push this line to us. I mean, it was pretty ridiculous. But we all saw it, and we all would turn on the television and watch so-called serious people say that, oh, this is normal. Oh, this is how the democratic process works, everybody. Oh, Ruth Bader Ginsburg, she shouldn't have retired, and you're sexist if you even mention that. Oh, Joe Biden, oh, he just has a stutter. You're just being ageist and ableist. I mean, like the gaslighting doesn't stop. But young people understand that it's gaslighting. They don't take it anymore, and so they've completely checked out of this entire ecosystem that so many people have invested in. I mean, people talk about a replay of 1968 where the dissatisfied youth marched in Chicago at the DNC. Well, I'll tell you what, my generation isn't even thinking about that. They're saying, why would we go march at the DNC? Who are we protesting? These are the bad guys. Like, what do we want? We want them to pick Kamala Harris. We want them to pick Pete Buttigieg. We want them to pick Gavin Newsom. No, none of these people are our saviors, and our generation understands it. So we're in a completely different space than some of these people would have us believe. Whether or not that will show up at the ballot, I mean, that's difficult to say. You know, the Democratic Party banks on ignoring the young people, so they can't really be banking on our vote. And they say young people don't vote anyway, so if they care about something, we can ignore them. And it's a nihilism that it's hard to wrap my head around. But then you realize that it makes sense because they don't care whether or not they win or lose. It doesn't matter to them. They don't have a vision for the country that they're trying to implement. They don't have a new rejuvenating platform that if they just band together, then they would implement it. No, they don't have that. They don't care if they win. If they win, then they're going to do the same policies, about 80% of what the Republicans are doing. So if they win, all the Democratic consultants, the congressmen, the think tankers, all of that apparatus, they keep their jobs. So what incentive do they have to actually change the country? So that's the level of nihilism that that my generation is looking at. And, well, we don't feel too comfortable about it.
Well, and you know what I'm going to tell you before I go to you, Dr. Marsh, you can tell us, just give us a sense of what we saw. Jeff Cohen, Norman Solomon. What was striking to me about these students at Columbia, Northwestern, all over the country, community colleges, four-year universities, young people, they would not talk to corporate media, which shocked New York Times, LA Times, Washington Post, blah, 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 when they would walk up on these campuses and they would try to speak to these kids in the encampments. They were on audio silent.
Well,
help me with that.
Yeah,
because it's like they're not listening.
As someone who was on the ground, I have an anecdote after you respond.
Yeah, well, my advice would be to these students that they should engage with the corporate mainstream media. But the reality is that these students had seen their protests being miscovered, mislabeled. No matter how many Jewish students were involved in the protests in support of the Gazans, they were called anti-Semites, even if they're Jewish. There wasn't anti-Semitism going on at these protests. You had the Jewish students protecting when the Muslim students were praying, and vice versa. Those were beloved communities and of the kind that MLK talked about. So I understand why students were so repulsed by the mainstream media coverage that labeled them as Jew haters, even if they're Jewish. But they should have engaged with mainstream reporters. And, Santita, my daughter was involved in some of these protests. I feel that's one of the engaging issues, that if a change was made, if Biden stepped aside no Democratic candidate could be as bad as Biden. They won't be great on Israel Palestine, but none could be as bad as Joe Biden. And it's worth mentioning that on Sunday, some of the biggest Muslim American groups in coalition have put out a statement saying, we want Joe Biden to withdraw. Our community has lost confidence in Joe Biden. So, I mean, I do believe the result of the November election is crucial, that Trump's got to be defeated, but Biden can't do it. So it's up to us in the grassroots to try to get a replacement candidate, and any candidate is going to have to deal with us. The base of the party is for ceasefire. The base of the party is for justice for Palestinians. So whoever's going to replace Joe Biden, and I hope it's soon, is going to have to deal with the base of the party, which wants a change on that fundamental issue of war and peace, militarism, Israel, Palestine.
But they continue to go for people who are not coming back.
I want to add something to this one, though, because I know you've been.
No, please. I mean, just add, because let me not neglect that she has been a bridge between the Black and the Arab, and specifically the Palestinian communities here in Chicago and across the country. So she is also an activist. And one of the things that has most impressed me about these demonstrations, our children are intersectional. If I want to find a Palestinian, I call one of my Jewish children, because I call all the kids from If Not Now my kids. I said, I have to be Auntie Santita. I'm so old. I'm old enough to be your mom. So, I mean, and I love that. And if I want to find, a Jewish student, I call a Palestinian. If I want to find, the progressive Blacks, I call all of them. I mean, they are all working with each other, which is a story that's not getting out there. Mm-hmm. They're all they have created the beloved community. It's happened. It's happening.
But that's the thing that the Democrats are particularly bad at. They've stopped listening to the people. And so it has not only fostered this disconnection, and it's not just that people under 40, people under 50, people over 50 think that Biden should not be their candidate this time around. And it's not only the foreign policy agenda. There are multiple elements of the domestic agenda that people want to see rectified in ways that the Democrats have not addressed. It's one thing to run out and say, Black people love me and I've got the Black vote and I'm going to do X, Y, and Z for you. It's another thing to actually follow through. I remember campaign promises around making sure that the efforts to further secure the Black vote after what the Supreme Court has done to the Civil Rights Act, that there would be to the Voting Rights Act, that there would be efforts from this administration, direct efforts to secure that. Because I've grown up my entire life, it feels like, with this risk to whether or not my vote is always going to be as certainly available to me as it is to other members of this society. That fundamental flaw should have been corrected and rectified and recodified a long time ago. But wasn't that part of the Biden promise? I haven't seen it. This week we get the disaster of the promises of student loan relief, and then the Supreme Court intervening in ways that is not only going to make that harder, but here's one that hasn't become a story. For people in this newest round, for some of the people who moved in to restructure their loans and reconsolidate their loans so that they would be eligible for this relief, when that Supreme Court decision came down, it is increasing their debt. You might have been paying for 15, 20 years on a 30-year student loan. And many people have had to take out 30-year student loans. So you may have been paying that. And when you restructured your loan, you restructured the principal and the interest. And it was supposed to be structured in some sort of way that your payment was going to go down instead of up. But this newest Supreme Court decision means that it went up, and you are now underwater on that student loan. It wiped out everything. If these numbers stand, it wiped out everything that you have already paid, and you're starting from zero with more interest on a higher loan. So, I think that there are many aspects where the Biden administration not only hasn't come through, but has failed. And there are many aspects where, I think that they have done at least a better job than the Trump administration had done. I'm not going to discount that. But what they have not done, what no one has done, is to pay attention to the base, to the people on the ground. And that is creating an atmosphere where younger voters aren't so much disenfranchised, as they are now exploring coalition government. They want to see other parties. The two-party system does not work for them. And so the conversations, whether they framed it in that way or not, are coming up more and more like, we need representation of our interests, whether it's a third party, whether we are uncommitted until we figure out what's supposed to happen. But they are checking out of this two-party system.
Mm-hmm.
And
Well, I mean, they've already done that. The plurality of Americans are independent.
Yeah. And we aren't winning, and by we, I mean all Americans, not Democrats, not Republicans. Americans are not winning. Oligarchs are winning.
But, to that point, and Jeff Cohen, Norman Solomon, once again, you see the Tea Party was co-opted by the right. Mm-hmm. Occupy was co-opted by the left. And they lost the enthusiasm because people are tired of the duopoly, this duopolistic two-party system. I mean, it does not work. And so when you were calling for Joe Biden to step aside, I mean, you're asking him to do something on principle. And everyone talks about Trump's ego. No one talks about the ego that would keep you in when it's clear that you are struggling personally. You have your wife now speaking for you. You're not even speaking. She's speaking for him. And she's telling us, well, you didn't see what you saw. I mean, help me with this. What am I supposed to do with that?
Yeah. I mean, it's really an underrated aspect of politics, that ego and self-focused sense of mission for one's own personal self-concept is so very powerful. And it's toxic when there's no lowercase d democratic structure, virtually. I mean, I'm here to tell you, I was on the Central Committee of the California Democratic Party for 10 years. Every chair has been worse than the chair before. We have a chair now named Rusty Hicks, who runs it like the first Mayor Daley in Chicago. He has no interest whatsoever, and he squelches any effort to have any horizontal discourse because it's all hammer from the top down. And I think we have this paradox in terms of policy, where on foreign policy, I mean, Trump is unhinged, so he's like a broken clock that's right once in a while. But in foreign policy, style aside, these are both two very dangerous people, Donald Trump and Joe Biden. When it comes to domestic policy,
wait a minute.
he has broken many promises, but there is a big difference between the two parties, and I think we need to acknowledge that.
Well, hold on, because you've given us equivalency between Joe Biden and Donald Trump. And heresy, wait a minute. Now, when you try to bring up his record on busing, the police Bill of Rights, just after we had watched Rodney King beaten within an inch of, centimeter of his life. Anita Hill, who refuses to accept his apology, she said no. Clarence Thomas. Now, mind you, I will give him the credit for some things that he has done. I hear him. I hear you. But why did you say, wait a minute? They're kind of parallel. They're running parallel to each other, Norman Solomon. What did you mean by that?
I think that on foreign policy, although they have some differences, both Trump and Biden are a threat to the survival of humanity. They're both advocating and pushing for policies that will increase the dangers of nuclear war, whether it's absolutely refusing to engage in diplomacy in Ukraine, whether it's jacking up the nuclear arms race and the federal spending for military purposes. Dr. King talked about the destructive demonic suction tube of military spending while healthcare, education, housing, so many other human needs go unmet in this country. That's the case with the Republican and Democratic parties. At the same time, I think as progressives, we've got to look at what it's like to try to get an abortion if you live in Texas or red states, and look at who put who on the Supreme Court. And the xenophobia, the racism is so extreme in the Republican Party. It's got a big foothold in the Democratic Party as well. But for credibility and for the future of the people of this country, we need to acknowledge that there is a significant difference on domestic policy between the two countries. Otherwise, we're de facto going to be saying that fascism doesn't matter, that it can't get any worse than now. And that's just not credible.
Yeah,
And
I
this
think
is the worst time to do that. I'm sorry to jump in. It's going to be brief. It's the worst time to do it because if you look at what's happening in Europe and with the ultra right, France is about to go hard right in terms of their parliament. If we are looking at a right-wing global movement and we don't have a differentiation from the leaders of the United States, that is dangerous at levels that I've never seen in my lifetime.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think the main difference, the main reason why it's important to defeat Trump in November is that if Trump is not defeated, the ability of progressives to organize for racial justice, social justice, peace, I believe is going to be undermined in ways that is going to make COINTELPRO look like a garden party.
Whew.
And if a Democrat, whether it's an imperfect, very imperfect corporate Democrat like Newsom or Whitmer or Cory Booker, whoever, anyone would be better than Biden, but we know we would be able to organize as progressives against that president. When Roots Action had this big movement and we won in Wisconsin, Michigan, and Arizona, it was vote Trump out in 2020, then challenge Biden. We understood that, voting Trump out was just one step. Organizing against and around Biden was the next step. So I believe our main mission is to get Joe Biden out, defeat Trump in November with whoever the candidate is. None could be worse than Joe Biden. And then we continue to organize for social justice and racial justice against and around the Democratic Party leadership.
Bryce Green, where are young people with all of this? I mean, because this made what Jeff Cohen and Norm Solomon, quite frankly, what everyone here, what everyone is saying, it's just what each of you are saying it makes sense. But where are young people? Are you all planning to vote in the fall?
Young people are planning on voting, but they're not planning on voting for Democrats. And you can make the argument that Jeff just made and that others have made that is important as progressives, as leftists, to ensure that Trump is not president, because Trump represents something that's far darker and far more accelerated than the corporatocracy that Biden represents. And that certainly is a valid argument. But young people, if you tell them that, you have to vote for this guy who's committing genocide because of banking regulations or because of labor laws and other policy, they're going to turn their ears off pretty quickly. And how could you not understand that impulse when they say, Joe Biden is the lesser of two evils? He has Lena Khan at the FTC. He's got Rohit Chopra. He's getting all these guys. You could tell them that, but then they see that Joe Biden sends another, 2,000 pound bomb to go destroy a tent encampment in Gaza. And so compared to that, it's very difficult. It's difficult to tell a young person who's seeing this every day on their phone, every day before their very eyes, that voting for a Democrat is the answer. And it's not like any Democrat is going to have a different position on Israel. They might have a more muted position, but Congress has spoken. In fact, they just voted that they're not even allowed. The State Department is no longer allowed to use the civilian casualty numbers coming out of Gaza. That's Congress, and that was 60-something Democrats who voted for that. And so telling a young person that the Democrats are our only hope is going to fall on deaf ears. Whether or not it's true, the factual content of that doesn't matter. The problem is that Democrats have, pissed away their goodwill, and they continue to do so every single day.
And they didn't have to, you have certain constituencies that have been your core constituencies. You have other constituencies who may be smaller in number, but typically have their finger on the zeitgeist of what's happening in the country. They're well aligned with it. Conversations within the Muslim community have acknowledged that we may be a small national constituency, but we are core constituencies in certain important states. And that elevates the importance of hearing our voice. You can't completely ignore us. But what also is true about the Muslim population in the United States is that we are highly diverse, African Americans, Arab Americans, Asian Americans, Latinos. We are across the board extremely diverse, and we aren't really segregated. You don't have like the Asian American mosque, right? It's a mosque and everybody can come. And, sometimes you'll have khutbahs in two languages, right? So this is a group where even though we might be strong in one demographic way of viewing us, we are very invested and engaged in broader areas. For instance, I'm on the board of the Black Muslim Leadership Council. And part of the way in which we communicate from positions of strength is that we are a part of the African American Muslim community. And that necessarily means we are part of the Muslim community and the Black community. And we are going to move our presence within both spheres. The Biden administration, to the extent that they hear and understand what Santita called the beautiful communities a little while ago, they don't seem to understand it. And so they began to just chip away at constituencies that were supporting them. Undermining things that were important within those constituencies.
But if I may say this, what's offensive is that much of the Democratic Party, and Jeff Cohen, Norman Solomon, you know this because you were part of the reconstruction of it, coming out of the Jackson campaigns. The people who run the party now came out of our campaigns. And many of them have forgotten what brought them there. Because we were talking about those campaigns, Bernie's campaigns, these were intersectional campaigns. You remember when Bernie Sanders was punched in the face? Mm-hmm. Remember that? Because he was supporting Reverend, and they said he was a traitor to the Jewish people. And I remember I was so mortified by that. I was like, because he was mayor then. And I said, "Are you okay?" He was like, "Oh no, don't worry about it. This is progress. We got to keep on going. And I felt awful, but he kept on going. But this is someone who's from a whole different space. He and Reverend, you all are from a whole different space, and I think just babies of the Second World War, and you came out changing the world, and it's like President Biden is out of step with that.
But that's not who runs the party, Santita.
That's what I'm saying. They're
people. The money runs the party. The people behind the party. There's a group of money people who make all of those decisions. Everybody else on the front line just execute what the people with money decide that they want to do.
Dwight, do you think
money doesn't vote? Money doesn't step in and pull the lever, put the dot on the form. I get the money is supposed to move opinion, but at the end of the day, people walk in individual people and put their votes. And that's where the party is losing. It's
But
losing the
you're
individual.
right.
They can get all the
But
money. They can get
But
all
they
the
only
money.
they only vote within the context of what's on the table. And so one of the things that the guys are raising is that the people never had the opportunity to vote for their preference
That's right.
because they were in the selection was imposed upon them.
Yes.
So by the time you get to the voting booth, you're operating in the context and the confines of what somebody has imposed upon you.
And
Is
that's
that
why
not
the
your
younger
arguments,
people are
guy?
turning to third party candidates and
Yeah.
asking for something that eventually will look more like coalition
No,
government.
you're right, but I think it's telling that Jill Biden had to speak to the money people as soon as she got off that stage.
Yeah.
She had to speak
Well,
with them because
and-
they feel they need the money, and they do, and the advertising. But let me tell you something.
No,
You
but
are
wait.
beloved to the people. There's no amount of money that could interfere with what the people will show up and do for you.
But I saw that with the Jackson campaign. I got it.
Mhm.
But I'm saying, I saw they tried to roll over him. I get it because we lived through that. I
Mhm.
mean, you don't know not you, but I'm just saying in 1988, when Reverend had, first of all, he survived the 84 campaign to live. That was the big accomplishment. Then when he became super, super duper viable, I mean, he was already viable in 84 because he emerged as a top tier candidate.
Mhm.
These two men went to the New York Times, the newspaper of record, and they said, "You are lying."
Yes.
That was a huge deal.
Yes.
I mean, because you do remember in 92, when Reverend was about to speak at the convention, they released an early edition of the New York Times. They lied once again, and they said that Reverend was coolly received at the convention. Reverend hadn't even given a speech yet. You remember that?
Yeah.
Mhm.
Well,
I mean,
yeah. I mean, in 1988, Reverend Jackson's campaign scared the hell out of them.
Mhm.
The New York Times was in utter fear. The elites were in fear because here was a rainbow coalition. Here was a Black reverend speaking out for gay rights. I mean, it was talk about intersectionality. I didn't hear the word back then, but it was happening. I think we have to understand that while there's the Biden corporate wing of the party, there's always been the Jackson Bernie wing of the party, and that's where most of the base is.
yes.
And when we talk about the donors that are so crucial, remember, it's the donors through AIPAC with Republican money and billionaire money that just defeated Jamal Bowman in a Democratic primary. You had Republican money going into a Democratic primary, $25 million to defeat a progressive Democrat. And the Democratic establishment didn't say, hey, we don't want Republicans determining. They were utterly silent. And we have to understand the Biden relationship with the donor class and who the donor class is. The donors who donate to Biden don't really care who wins.
Mhm.
That's
If
right.
Biden loses to Trump or Trump loses to Biden, the donor class generally wins. And Biden, one of his first meetings in 2019, 2020, when he was running for president, he goes to this donor meeting with all the big donors at the Carlisle Hotel in Manhattan, New York. And a pool reporter was in there. I think she was with either Bloomberg or Reuters. And, it's because of grassroots pressure that when they have these private fundraisers, there has to be one pool reporter there to hear what the politician is saying to the donors. What did Joe Biden tell the donors? He said, look, if I'm the president, you won't have to worry about your income levels. And then he went on to say, nothing will fundamentally change.
Mhm.
That was his assurance to the donors. What we understand from the base of the Democratic Party and the 94% of young Democrats that said they want a candidate other than Biden, the base of the Democratic Party wants things to fundamentally change.
Yes.
We want peace and justice and racial justice. We want the military budget slashed so that this money can go to housing and healthcare and education and the environment. the base of the party is progressive. And that's where the donors are so fearful. And that's why they've been so protective of Joe Biden up until this day that he revealed he can't put together a coherent sentence.
But the cracks are there. The base of the party, money aside, the base of the party voted for Summer Lee. The base of the party stands behind Ilhan Omar. The base of the party has come out for Rashida Tlaib. And they have had to fight mighty fights. But that's why I have a conviction that the people, just like you guys are saying, the people are going to have to do that. It's going to be the people who walk into those voting booths, and you cannot buy them. You cannot out advertise them. They are not going to believe the spin when they can see certain things with their own eyes. And if we give them choices of candidates that they know are listening to them and working for them, then we keep our democracy.
On that note,
with Joe Biden, we have to plan even further forward.
Absolutely.
And instead of our 4-year outlook, our November outlook, we need that 50-year outlook that right now from the other side is kicking our butts.
Well,
and
let me say this.
Your outlook has to be to return power to the people.
Lisa, let me say this because I have less than a minute. Norman Solomon, why don't you close us out? Because
there's the saying, history doesn't repeat itself exactly, but it rhymes an awful lot. And I'm having a flashback. The first Democratic convention I went to, 1988, where CBS and the networks were saying you can only have one quarterback, echoing Dukakis, who lost. The workers at the convention center had big buttons, keep hope alive. That's the gap.
well, now there you have it. And one of the things that I learned from Reverend Jackson and from you, Jeff Cohen, and you, Norman Solomon, and you, Dwight, is that you never stop, and Bryce, Alia, you never stop organizing.
Yeah.
Part of the reason Reverend was able to absorb the onslaught because he was attacked viciously by various establishments when he ran, and so was Bernie Sanders. You don't just run, and that's what I think. That's what happened. That's what missed. That's what Jamal Bowman missed. You got to organize all the time. You got to register people to vote all the time. That's the only way that this works. People have to see you, feel you, be with you all the time. That's why I want you to be active with rootsaction.org, rootsaction.org. Please support fairness and accuracy in reporting. They support us. When I want to find out when something is not quite sitting right with me, or I need information, when I don't want to be propagandized, when I want to get the truth, I've always gone to you, Jeff Cohen. I've always gone to you, Norman Solomon. And I thank you, and I thank God for you. I thank God for your health and strength, and for all that you're doing. And Bryce, soon to be Dr. Green, proud of you, young man. Keep it up. Dwight McKee, thank you for all of the inspiration. Got to get Dr. Cornell West back on here. Dr. Alia Amar, my sister, I love you. And I just love you all. And thank you so much for honoring my audience with your presence today. I mean, this truly has been a treat.
Thank you,
Truly.
Santita.
Thank you, Santita.
Take care. Take care, Bryce.
May God bless all.
Take it easy.